I am Madeline James, and this is going to be the 10th part in my world building guide series for creating an Earth-like fantasy world. And I will link the full playlist below if you're just getting started, if you want to start at the beginning. But in our last part, we mapped our drainage basins or our watersheds and started working on our wetland biomes. So today we are going to continue on with doing our general biomes maps. The blog post version of this video is going to be in two parts. I'm going to separate out the general guide, high-level biomes discussion, high-level stuff, and the actual mapping instructions with a more detailed deep dive into each of the individual biomes we're going to put on our map. So there will be two blog post versions of this compared to normally there's just one. And in this video, I have a little, not like a table of contents, but just to kind of give you an idea of how we're going to go through this. We're going to start by talking about biomes in general and explaining them and different ways they're divided and some high-level concepts. Then I will give you a high-level overview of the biomes we will be using. Again, high-level, followed by actually mapping out these biomes. And then at the end, I will actually go through and deep dive into each of these biomes. So if you're not interested in that super low-level information, you can skip that part. And then if I have time, and there'll be a chapter down below if I manage to accomplish this, but if I finish the biome map for my current world building project, this world I just do for this guide, but the one that I'm actually doing for my current project, which is a lot more recent, and I'm trying out a lot of new things, so I will, if I finish it, give you a sneak peek of what that looks like at the end and kind of talk about a couple of the things that I've changed about the process that I'm playing around with and trying out. But if I don't finish it in time, it won't make it into this video, but I'll show it at some point, so yes. But then, let's see. If you are wondering why we need a biomes map when we already have our climate regions mapped, there are definitely some symptoms that are simple enough to basically just look at your climate region and basically know exactly what your biomes are going to be. And there's a lot more factors when you get a bit deeper into these biomes, where we need to look at a lot more than just the climate zone. And, further, the information we find for a biome is a lot more descriptive from a world building perspective than just looking at climate, oh, it's this hot and it rains this much. What does that really tell you from the perspective of a story? You're not going to be giving weather predictions and temperatures in your book necessarily, but what does the setting look like? What lives there, etc. So I think it's really important to have an understanding of the biomes. So that's what we're going to do. So now, before we get started, there are a few things that I do want to get out of the way. I haven't figured out a good format for doing adjustments to this guide yet, but I wanted you to know that I do plan on going back and adjusting, in particular, how I handle precipitation around the equator, and to a lesser degree some of the other belts at some point. I have gotten a number of comments from people that have noticed this, and after looking into it more, I think my method ignores between season precipitation a bit too much, particularly in the equatorial region. So I've been playing around with some ways to adjust this, and it's a long process, right? Because doing a whole map for this takes dozens and dozens of hours to finish, and especially mine have been getting more and more granular, where they're more detailed, way more detailed than this map is, which takes way more time. So it might take a little while for me to figure out, but I'm working on it. But if you look here, when you compare my climate regions map with the one of Earth, you can see there's a really big difference in the equatorial precipitation around the equator. And I really just don't have a good format for how to share adjustments and things I'm changing yet. I know that Artifaxian does little update videos immediately after, but I tend to find these things further down the road, and I don't know how that would work from a guide perspective versus I'm gonna bring you with me while I do all this cool world building stuff. So if you have any ideas, let me know. But to talk about this specifically, a lot of my easternmost continent is going to be pretty dry here because of that East Coast mountain range. But you should see more rain in that gap in the south, which is, let me see if I can, I have this little arrow here, but that's right here. And then the westernmost continent should see a lot more rain in this big desert area here, similar to the area in the southern hemisphere of South America on Earth, right here It's kind of similar in terms of distance from the equator, and there's not really much mountains here on this side, not a lot of mountains here on this side, so like you really should see a lot more rain there. When I have the ITCZ, if you were to look back at those maps, my ITCZ hugs down here and then it goes like up here where it's kind of blocked by those mountain ranges. So I just never filled in the area there, which is kind of a problem. So, and there's a few other things I've been kind of tweaking as I go and trying out and expanding on it. But I'm not going to go back at this point and redo all the maps for this world to move forward. But what I am going to do in this video is I'm going to kind of extend the tropical regions a bit to handle this better, and I'm kind of just going to do that on the fly, but once I get to that map, I'll sort of circle the areas that I am considering more tropical for these biomes to kind of correct that. So, let's get back to the actual video. What is a biome? So a biome is an area that is classified by the soil, the vegetation, the climate, and the wildlife that can be found there. There are a lot of different systems for this, similar to climate regions, maybe even more so than climate regions, such as this example you can see here, which only has 7 different biome regions: polar, subpolar, boreal, cool temperate, warm temperate, subtropical, and tropical. And something this high level is great for a global map like this, but it doesn't tell us anything we don't already know about our worlds. This is far less granular than just our climate region map. This isn't what we're going to go with. Here's an example of a more complex one. So this one has like 18 different biomes, roughly. I think I counted that right. And if you look at this next to the world's climate map there, you can see a lot of trends in terms of like these climates are clearly found in these similar areas in terms of climate regions. And this is more the direction I want to go in. I want to add another layer of detail to our world in the form of biomes instead of just showing it in a different way, like, oh, this climate region has this biome, right? Like, I could do that, but we're going to do more than that because you know why you're here, right? And we will be going perhaps too granular for a global map, but I think the concepts are important and they will apply to regional maps as well. So some of these biomes, you might not have very many of them because in real life, well, not in real life, but like, if you were to look at more regional local maps, they're going to be fairly small anyway, so you just won't see them on a global map, but it should give you a good idea that we can then apply to those other maps in the future. So here is an example of one of these systems for determining biomes, or as they call them, life zones, and you see this one used pretty popularly. The Holdridge life zone model classifies terrestrial bioclimatic zones on land. I'm going to mispronounce half of this stuff, I apologize. This system has 38 different classes. You can see like polar desert, cool temperate steppe, subtropical moist forest, tropical thorn woodland. And this system is based on the idea that once you know the climate, you can know the soil and vegetation. There are, if you can kind of make out this, chart graph here, there are 3 major axes and 3 minor indicators. The major axes are that annual precipitation, which is up on blue right here, the biotemperature right here, which is the growing season length, and the temperature, which is shown in green, and then potential evapotranspiration ratio, where is that? Right here, and that's shown in red. And then they have some additional indicators are humidity provinces down here, latitudinal regions over here, and altitudinal belts over here. And something you should notice is when we assigned our Köppen climate classifications, we considered most of this already, right? We look at potential evapotranspiration, we looked at precipitation, we looked at temperature, we considered all of that stuff, right? But there are a few things we didn't necessarily keep in mind, like latitude and altitude in terms of the amount of like how long the growing seasons are. Like some of this stuff we didn't quite get into, right? And we're going to be working from our already mapped climate region map, so I really don't want to go back and like re-look and figure out all of this stuff in order to use a system like this. So what we're going to do is work from our existing climate region maps and some of our other maps, and we are going to make our own system for figuring this out. So we are going to be talking about biomes mainly from the perspective of vegetation. And I will be getting in my cultural world building series a lot more into the sort of impacts on cultures and people based off these different biomes in a lot more of a detailed fashion. We'll kind of touch on it a little bit, but we're mainly going to focus on vegetation here in terms of actually figuring out which biomes are where. We know the climate and everything that goes into that already, temperature, precipitation, etc. And I find that once you have biomes, the rest comes pretty easily. And one quick disclaimer or note going forward is that a lot of biomes and vegetation can be found in a surprisingly broad range of environments, but there will be a more limited range that covers a large percentage. And a lot of these biomes have ranges that they can be in, right? So like you may find them in a relatively large range of, say, temperature, but on one end of the spectrum versus the other, they're going to be very different. But we're still going to be using these kind of more general classifications of biomes because we kind of have to start somewhere, right? We need to divide things up somehow, and, you know, I will be covering mostly the core places that we are going to find these biomes, but there's definitely room for some flexibility. So if I say, you know, this biome is only found in these places under these conditions, that is not the only possible place they could be found or placed. There's some flexibility, but, you know, that's where you're mainly going to see them. How are we going to divide the major types of vegetation? The amount of / the high level type of vegetation is going to roughly be based on the amount of water and the amount of nutrients that are available. So you can sort of see I've created this like really, really rough diagram that again is incredibly oversimplified, but you can sort of see if you start down here with the orange scrubland. Scrublands is a biome type. And again, this is these are high-level types. These aren't the actual biomes we're going to map, but the biomes we map will all fit into one of these categories. But the scrubland biomes are going to be dominated by scrub, which is essentially where it's too dry or frozen for other types of vegetation. And this is where you're going to have the least water available. Some scrubland biomes include things like deserts, tundra, etc. The next one up here is grasslands. And grasslands are dominated by grass. Surprising. And this is essentially where there is little to no trees, typically where it is too dry or there's not enough nutrients available to support trees. And these are mostly maintained by fires, whether they're natural or otherwise, and a general lack of precipitation. And then we have forests and we have woodlands, which are dominated by trees. And there's a lot of subtypes here, which we'll talk about in a bit. But these have probably the most broad application, and we're going to have the most biomes in this category. And then we have wetlands, which we already talked about, which is essentially where you have more water entering the system than leaving. So you can have different levels of vegetations here, lakes, bogs, swamps, marshes, etc. And we map these in our last part, but they all have more water available, right? And then to give another example, I have ice sheets over here. We're not going to really, we're going to map them, but ice sheets aren't necessarily a biome because you don't have life there, really. There's no soil, right? So there's no vegetation, so there's no nutrients available, but there's some amount of water, but it doesn't matter how much. So those are the high-level sort of idea of what we're going to be looking at. All right, so scrub-dominated biomes. So these biomes have a lot of different names. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as like bush, or sometimes they'll even call them shrublands, but that's not really quite as accurate. They're also called chaparral, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly. But again, these are areas that are going to be too dry or too cold and frozen for other types of vegetation. Because of how dry these are, fires are a very natural part of these biomes and affect any humans that try to live there. So these are the 6 different types of scrub-dominated biomes that we're going to be looking at. Mediterranean scrub, Mediterranean coastal sage, garage? Pronunciation, I don't know. Heath, tundra, and desert. And I kind of have here some of the most common climate classifications that you find each of these in, but in general, they're going to be pretty dry. The next category that we're going to map is going to be our grass-dominated biomes. These are going to be large open areas dominated by grasses, typically because there's not enough rainfall for trees. There's going to be a lot of grazing animals, and again, fire risk because we're still looking at lower precipitation. Many are going to have really rich soils that can be used for agriculture, and because of all the grasses, you see a lot of herbivores. You see, You tend to find some of the largest land animals on Earth in these biomes. And we will be looking at 4 subtypes of grass biomes. The first 2 are tropical and the next 2 are temperate. So we have tropical savanna, tropical steppe, tall grass prairie, and steppe or shortgrass prairie. And the next are tree-dominated biomes. These are separated into 2 sections, forest and woodland biomes. We're going to have 5 forest biomes, which is the ones that have continuous tree cover, and then 4 woodland biomes. These are ones that have discontinuous tree coverage. And you can determine where these are found based off the climate and the soil. So forests can have multiple layers or stories or canopies to them. They can be discontinuous or grouped shrub stories underneath of that main continuous tree cover. They can have undergrowth like grasses, forbs, etc. Forbs are like flowers or weeds. And so we're going to have rainforest, subtropical conifer forests, west coast marine forests, temperate broadleaf mixed forests, and the taiga or boreal forests. And then for woodlands, again, these are discontinuous or grouped tree cover, meaning lots of light making it through the canopy to have a lot more shrubs or grasses than you would see in a forest. We're going to have the tropical deciduous woodland, Mediterranean woodland, desert woodland, and steppe woodland. This is just a super high level look at all of these different biomes we're going to be mapping and some of the climate regions you'll find them in. As we're going to get into, just the climate region isn't enough to distinguish a lot of these, but I wanted a quick little helper of just where you might see them to look for places they could be in case you want to see that too. So here's the key I put together for the biomes map. You'll see I added ice sheets in here. I added the wetland biomes that we're considering as well. And just another real quick reminder, the climate regions these biomes are placed in are not exact. There is wiggle room. Don't go wild, but going into a similar climate zone with a biome is okay and expected. And also some of these biomes would be really small areas, so we are mostly trying to get a sense of what is going on with this and keep it high level. So we're going to go through each of the climate classification sections and do this by like climate classification as we go. So we're going to start with mapping all the regions that on our climate maps are considered tropical, right? So these are the ones that start with an A. And every climate region is going to have a different set of possible biomes, and very few of them are going to have the same options. And again, we're starting with our tropical climate regions. You may have some wetlands in these areas already, but otherwise you will be adding tropical savanna, tropical deciduous woodland, and tropical rainforest in order of least humidity, least to most humidity and precipitation. So in AW, which is our savanna, in the drier half, you're going to see tropical savanna, and in the wetter half, you'll have tropical deciduous woodland. And in AM and AF, you're going to see tropical rainforest. The drier sides of these are going to have, so mainly in AM, is going to have less canopies, be a little bit less dense than in AF, the, rainforest climate region, which is going to be a lot denser and have even more canopies. So here is my map where I went through and did this. So you can see at the bottom, this is where I mapped some new tropical areas. I didn't want to go crazy, but these little blue sections that I drew in, I considered them to be tropical and consider these to have more precipitation as if those existing tropical areas were kind of extended. And you can see, and I do this for each of these, but I have the key here of the colors so you can see which regions we're looking at, right around in here, a little bit up here. And then you can see just the regions that I mapped from tropical. So it's a little bit hard to see with the biomes. I tried to pick colors that were distinct enough, but you can see tropical savanna, you can see rainforest, you can see tropical deciduous, all in there. And again, these regions would probably be even more extensive, but it's kind of hard to know exactly without actually going through and remapping it all, but this is a pretty good idea. So next we're going to do arid climate regions. And the steppe regions are going to be a mix of grassland or woodland. This will be partially the result of human interference and the nature of recent wildfires, but you will most likely see steppe woodland along higher hill slopes, where we're transitioning to non-arid regions and along rivers. You won't really see that on a global map, but if you have an area with a lot of rivers for some reason, maybe there would be more of those, but on a smaller scale, you would definitely see that. And you can sprinkle some woodlands in some other areas as well. We won't really be able to tell at a global scale whether or not these would be, like, you can't be exact here, right? Again, we're doing global maps. These are things that are a little bit more applicable at a smaller scale, but we're trying to get an idea. So the rest of the steppe regions will be tropical steppe, or BSH, or steppe prairie for the drier, hotter side of BSK, or they will be tall grass prairie for the wetter, coldest side of BSK. And look at the temperature and precipitation maps to determine where these areas will be, and I kind of included this, like, you know, you can kind of get an idea of the progression of which biomes you're going to find where. And your hot and cold deserts will have the same biome types here. Desert woodland in similar areas as with steppe woodlands in steppe regions. And so along higher hill slopes overlooking deserts, transition areas to non-arid regions, and along rivers. And you can also put some smatterings where there could be, say, a spring or an oasis. And this is the map I drew. So you can see down here all of my arid regions, and up here I mapped those out. There's definitely a lot of deserts in this world, especially over here and with this mountain range. You are going to see that. There's going to be a lot of deserts over here. Next, we're going to do Mediterranean regions. And these are all the ones that start with the CS. So the biomes in our Mediterranean regions are going to be heavily impacted by the quality and the stability of the soil, given especially how dry these areas are. That makes a really big difference. So any region that is not particularly steep or unstable is going to be woodland, mainly Mediterranean woodland, which is, you know, where you're going to have your gentle slopes and your hills, well-draining soils. And in rare cases, you can also find in CSB and CSC, any area by the coast and bordering a CFB West Coast Marine Forest could have some West Coast Marine Forest here as well. And in CSD, if you have any colder parts of CSC bordering particularly cold regions, you could see taiga. And the next easiest thing to find will be the Mediterranean scrub, which is mainly going to be in CSA or CSB, or Mediterranean coastal stage if it's a sea-facing coastal cliff. Where those can't grow, very inhospitable areas, very alkaline soil, you will find garrigue. As a simplifier for now, a lot of arid and semi-arid regions have alkaline soil. You will probably have patches of this, but put more of them where you have an arid instead of a semi-arid summer on particularly steep cliffs, and that should give you a good enough approximate for now. So this is me mapping this out, and you will notice I don't have a lot of CS climate regions on this map, so those are very limited for me. But then moving on to humid temperate regions, and these are going to be your CF climate regions. So in your higher elevations and hillsides in CFA regions, put subtropical conifer forests. For CFE and CFB, add in some areas of tall grass prairies and flatter, gently sloping areas. And then in CFB, you can add a narrow strip along coasts that get particularly high rainfall for West Coast marine forests. And this can slip into other humid temperate zones as well. And then everywhere else, put temperate broadleaf / mixed forests. You can see here, I mainly have this in the southern continent down here, where I just have a ton of temperate broadleaf mixed forests and a little bit of the other ones. And so next is the dry winter temperate climate regions. And these are going to be mainly monsoon influenced or subtropic highlands. So in some higher elevations or hillsides that are cooler year round, you could find some subtropic conifer forests in CWA, CWB, and CWC mainly. In the rest of CWA and CWB, you'll find tropical deciduous woodland. And then in the rest of CWC and CWD, you will find taiga. Here you can see my map for dry winter temperate region biomes. I do have a good number of these spread out, so I kind of have those filled in. So next we're going to map our Mediterranean continental regions, which is the DS climate regions. So in drier, steeper parts of DSA, you can have some steppe prairie. In some bordering coastlines of DSB, you could see some West Coast marine forest where we are bordering that already. And then the rest of DSA and DSB should be temperate broadleaf mixed, as well as the warmer half of DSC. And then in the colder parts of DSC and the warmer parts of DSD, you will find taiga forests. And then in the coldest parts of DSD, you will find tundra. This is me adding these to my map, and again, this one also has a very limited area where I found these, so those are all kind of bunched up there. And then next we're going to go to humid continental regions, which are CF climate regions. So for DFA and DFB, in some areas, add in a bit of tallgrass prairie. In flatter, gently sloping areas, just a couple small patches of this. The coldest parts of DSC and all of DFD will be taiga, and everywhere else is going to be temperate broadleaf / mixed forests. This is where I did this on my map. Again, this one was also pretty minimal. And then for our humid monsoon influenced DW climate regions, I might have been saying C when I meant D, but what's on the slide is correct. DW climate regions. In the drier, steeper parts of DWA and DWB, but mainly DWB, you can have some steppe prairie. Again, just little patches here or there, sloped regions. In coldest parts of DWC and all of DWD, you will find taiga, and then everywhere else will be temperate broadleaf mixed forest. This is me adding these to my map, and I actually had a good number of these, so you can see these regions right around in here. And then for polar regions, which are our E climate regions, ET is tundra and EF is ice sheets. This one's pretty easy. So you can see me adding that in here on my map. And then this is my complete bio map. And again, it looks pretty similar to my climate region maps, but this tells you a lot of other interesting information, and I think it's a lot of fun. So let's get into a sort of deep dive into all of these specific biomes and what they are and what they mean. And again, there'll be a separate blog post for this if you'd prefer to just go look at that blog post, but I made little note slides trying to I don't know, I wanted something for you to be able to look at, so don't laugh at my awful messy handwriting. I tried. Let me know if this doesn't work for you or does work for you if I do this sort of thing again in the future. Trying to put slides together for this sort of a thing. But scrub-dominated biomes is where we're going to start. And again, these are areas that are too dry or too cold or frozen, and you're mainly going to find these in a lot of the CS biomes, CFB, BWH, BWK, and ET. So let's start with deserts. So deserts are very discontinuous, low to medium height scrubs, more around spots with more water. In some areas will have no vegetation at all, such as unstable sand dunes, desert pavement, alkali flats, and you may find some light grass cover in good years, an understory of forbs that appear in the brief time there is water in the spring, and then seed quickly before they dry up. You'll have rare trees around rare bits of water like cottonwoods and palms, and while hot deserts are very hot during the day, they are much colder at night. And this lends itself towards a good number of nocturnal animals. There's going to be very little standing water, so animals have adapted to this by storing water or getting it through their food. It is very hard for people and animals to live here. Humans that live in deserts tend to be nomadic just because of how little water there is and how far they have to travel to get it, and how spread out the resources are in general. This is mainly found in BWH and BWK. Next is tundra. And this is going to be low-lying small scrubs that can be continuous, discontinuous, or grouped. You will see occasional grasses, sedges, forbs, lichens, and trees, but the trees will only grow as tall as shrubs here, like willows and adlers. There's going to be a very short growing season, and the unfrozen soil is shallow, and it's very windy here. So these are mainly going to be our ET climate in regions like on Earth you would see northern Alaska and Canada, the north/south north/south coast of Iceland, northern Antarctica, and you can also find this above the tree line on mountains. Mediterranean scrub is going to be dense scrub with most of the biomass underground, so more roots than shoots, and this is going to be the most extensive of the scrublands. It's very dense, it's near impossible to hike through, and there may be some layers of herbs, small grasses beneath, and this is mainly going to be found in CSA or CSB Mediterranean climate where you have severe summer droughts, but these must also be on steeper, more unstable slopes, which they provide a bit of stabilization for. On gentler slopes, you'll find grassland or Mediterranean woodland instead. And this type of scrubland is very reliant on fire. They produce oils in a way in which to avoid the decay of dead plant matter, so it just sits waiting to be fuel for fires. And then the fires burn away the dead plant matter, helps seeds sprout, and it doesn't touch the roots of the plants because, again, it has a very extensive biomass underground. And people familiar with this kind of climate will know to stay away in summer when the risk of fires is great and they will not build in it. You definitely see a bit of modern issues with this in like California modernly with trying to deal with the fires and people losing their homes, and it's definitely, if you have a choice, not really a place that, a lot of people would build homes, especially in less modern societies. So then we have Mediterranean coastal sage, and this is very similar to Mediterranean scrub, but it's slightly different varieties in climate. It's typically found where you have mild winters, especially on foggy coasts, typically lower elevations than Mediterranean scrub, and it's facing the sea. It will not be found far from the sea, and it's typically found on steep cliffs. Steep cliffs, wow. Instead of a deep root system like you find with the Mediterranean scrub, they have shallow roots, and their way to get water is they actually capture fog drip during summer droughts, which is how they have adapted. Next is Garrick. I am so sorry. This is also closely related to Mediterranean scrub, but it is less continuous and the plants tend to be smaller. You might occasionally find the small tree or group of trees, but this is going to be things like thyme or oregano, lavender, etc. And these are found in the same areas as the other scrubs, except they are found in soils that aren't good for these other types. So think very alkaline soils, such as over limestone or serpentine outcrops. Next we have heath, which is typically found in the West Coast marine climate, CFB. It's a continuous cover of low shrubs, occasional small trees or small groups of trees, and some lower lying small grasses and herbs. Think a lot of areas like England, Scotland, Wales, New Zealand. And those are the scrub-dominated biomes. So moving on to the grass-dominated biomes, we're going to look at the 4 subtypes, the 2 tropical, the 2 temperate. And these are all large open areas dominated by grasses, lots of grazing animals. You can see some of the biggest herbivores. You see a lot of fires. Grasslands are perfect for pasturing and agriculture because of the rich, deep soils. And you really only get 2 seasons here. You get a growing season and a dormant season. And you tend to see these a lot between deserts and forests. So the first one we're going to look at is tropical savanna. And this is going to be medium tall grasses, very soft, green, humid with the rainy summer season, allowing a lot of grazing for herds. Winters are going to be hotter, dry seasons. Grasses will dry up and are very prone to catching on fire. Animals will migrate away during this time. And people living in these areas commonly burn the savanna before the rainy season starts to help fertilize the ground, to give a jump start for all the grasses that are needed in order to support the herds. It's really great for domestic herds of cattle, horses, goats, camels, but the soil is not really rich enough for farming. May not always be natural without human interference. This might get replaced by tropical deciduous woodland. But again, that's not as great for the herd, so some of these are probably maintained by people, some by naturally caused fires. It kind of depends. And you will also find occasional clusters of trees here, acacias, palms, giant cacti, etc. And in drier areas or times, you would see a shrub layer kind of overtaking the grasses. And you might find some forbs as well. Next is tropical steppe. And here you will have short grasses with some small shrubs, very low lying ground cover. In good years, the grass cover will be pretty lush, and in dry years it will be sparse and you'll see more of the shrub layer. This area is very susceptible to drought and famine, so any animals, plants, people that are living here have to be adapted to that. You'll typically find people being very nomadic. These will typically be found in BSH climates, tropical, semi-arid, or tropical steppe. Transition from savanna to tropical desert is another area you'll find these. So then tall grass prairie. So these are going to be medium tall grasses that can be dense in wetter years and can show more of the shorter grass species in drier years. You'll find forbs, especially in the early spring. Think lovely wildflowers. Along the banks of rivers, you will see gallery forests along the banks. Trees could also be found around a spring or a seep, but otherwise they are pretty treeless. These will be found in the moisture parts of BSK climates, which is our cold semi-arid. These can be found on the drier side of humid subtropical CFA and humid continental climates like DFA and DFB, and then also the West Coast marine climate CFB. These are also pretty common in the transition from lusher vegetation to desert and steppe. Wildfires are a big hazard here, and they may also be human-created with fires, and would otherwise maybe turn back to temperate broadleaf deciduous and mixed forests. Next is our steppe or shortgrass prairie, and this is going to be short to medium grasses. They aren't as dense as the tall grass prairie, and in wetter years the taller grasses will dominate, and in drier years the shorter grasses will dominate. And you'll also have some low shrubs. These are mainly found in temperate steppe or temperate semi-arid climates like BSK, and also in the transition areas from prairie to temperate deserts depending on the precipitation. So that is our grass biomes. So moving on to tree biomes, and we're going to go through again all the forest types and then all the woodland types. So as we mentioned, forests can be multiple layers, stories, canopies. They can also have a discontinuous or grouped shrub story and other types of undergrowth. And then the woodlands are going to be discontinuous or grouped tree cover, meaning there's going to be a lot more light coming through the canopy for shrubs or grasses. And we're going to start with the rainforest. So rainforests have a huge biodiversity. You may find hundreds of times the number of tree species here than at mid-latitude forests. Animals and other life forms here are very diverse, and the food chain is more of a web, and it is very, very delicate. It's very sensitive in the short term to any sort of disruptive changes. Most animals here will live in the trees, and the majority of living creatures are insects. Evergreen tree species are mainly what you're going to find here, and there might be 3 to 4 different layers of tree canopies. The forest floor, because of all of these canopies, is so shady and dark that it is actually clear of anything. Where there are breaks in the canopy, you will get lush undergrowth that is what you would typically call jungle, and that is impassable. This jungle is what you will see along rivers, but if you can get past that bit of undergrowth, it's probably pretty clear and easy to walk around. Because of this climate, though, soils are very poor, and if you remove the trees, it is basically useless for agriculture or animal husbandry. A lot of spices come from rainforests, though. Vanilla, pepper, allspice, and these will be found in warm climates with heavy rainfall, like tropical humid climate and tropical monsoon climate. Typically, any sort of people that live in rainforests are going to use like a slash and burn type of agriculture, where they'll cut down the vegetation, they'll burn it to create a little bit of nutrients in the soil, but then that's only going to last so long, and then they'll have to slowly migrate somewhere else. So you wouldn't really call those people migratory, but they're going to slowly have to move as they deplete the soils in the area. Next, we have a subtropical conifer forest. And this is going to be a continuous cover of conifers, which is like pines, understories of evergreen broadleaf shrubs. So think like azaleas, blueberries, that sort of a thing. And these are mainly found in humid subtropic CFA climates where there are sandy, fast-draining soils, so nutrient poor. If the soil is heavier here, you will see a temperate broadleaf and mixed forest instead. And these tend to survive due to symbiosis with fungi. Some examples of this are the pine barrens of New Jersey, piney woods of the American South, the Araucaria forest of southern Brazil. So again, there's going to be very little agriculture here because it is also pretty nutrient poor. Next, we have the West Coast Marine Forest. And this is going to be a continuous cover of conifers, of things like firs, redwoods, sequoias. And there can be a story of extremely tall trees, like redwoods, and a story of regular tall trees. The understudy, you might find evergreen and deciduous broadleaf shrubs. I cannot pronounce anything today. I apologize. But blackberries, blueberries, etc. You can find ferns, you can find forbs. In more humid areas, you might see lots of mushrooms. And this can vary based on location from almost a woodland to a temperate rainforest based off the proximity to the ocean, the impact of onshore winds, the relation to mountains, etc. And on Earth, these can only be found in the North American Pacific Northwest coast, mainly CFB and some of the bordering Mediterranean climates. Next, we have temperate broadleaf and mixed forest, or our summer green forests. These are going to have a continuous but not dense single canopy forest of medium tall but not very tall deciduous trees. You could have a shorter layer of trees like dogwoods and redwoods. A small variety of species in a given area, but as you move around to slightly different conditions, you'll see different species of trees showing up. And this biome can actually be divided into 5 different zones, but we aren't going to get into that. And because the canopy is not very dense, you get a very good shrub layer here. So blueberries, rhododendrons, raspberries, etc. Lianas, which are wild grapes, poison ivy. You'll have a ground layer of bryophytes, mosses, fungi, lichens. It's also very seasonal. This is where you get the fall color, where things tend to die in winter. Spring is the growing season. You'll see a ton of forbs that want to get through their growth cycle in before the tree canopies fill out. So you'll see those big bursts of like flowers and other types of things in early spring as the buds on trees are just starting to appear. And because we have deciduous trees where their leaves die, fall to the ground, turn into nutrients, the soil here is pretty fertile. If that's not a pattern you've noticed, evergreen trees typically mean not great soil, deciduous trees, good soil. That's sort of a pattern you can draw. But these were some of the very first forests that we converted to agriculture land on Earth, partially because they're in a pretty temperate zone and the soil's pretty great. We also tend to see trees here that have sap, which is used to keep the roots from freezing in winter. And animals here have to be pretty adaptable with the changing seasons, as do people. It gets pretty warm, it gets pretty cold. You have to be adapted for those changing conditions. These tend to be found in humid subtropic and milder humid continental climate zones. They also need pretty nutrient-rich soils, they create pretty nutrient-rich soils. This is all pretty cyclical. Some examples can be found in the South and East North America, Northern China, Japan, Western Europe. Next we have the taiga or the boreal forest. These are going to be conifer forests, mostly evergreen needle leaves. And in North America, these tend to be dominated by pines, spruces, firs, etc. This is going to be your DFC, DFD, DWC, DWD climate regions where you have an extremely cold winter and a tepid summer. You have a very short growing season, shorter trees, and high winds and brittleness can lead to shorter branches too. And the trees are more widely spaced and only provide maybe a bit of continuous cover at the bottom of the trees where they're pretty sparse the higher up you go. And they're also very low diversity in terms of the species of vegetation here. A lot of light does get to the floor, but it's mostly covered by a carpet of dead needles and branches. And so if there are big enough patches between the trees, you will see more undergrowth. But because of this carpet of dead needles, there's actually a pretty big fire risk here, even though it tends to be in a lot colder regions. And the fires here can cause a sort of odd cycle. You'll have a fire that clears out the forest floor, burns up all those needles. Deciduous trees will move in due to that, all those nutrients in the soil, making the soil less acidic, which then lets the conifers take over again. And because of the evergreen trees, there is little nutrition going into the soil, so again, not great for any sort of agriculture. And many animals tend to migrate away in winter, or they hibernate or have other sorts of adaptations to the extreme cold. And there's few animals here compared to other biomes, but a lot of insects and a lot of the birds that eat those insects. Next we have tropical deciduous woodland, and this is going to be found in our tropical wet, dry AW climate mainly. The trees tend to either be deciduous or have other adaptations for the dry season. There'll be an understory of grasses and shrubs. It's closer to a tropical rainforest. You might find a second taller canopy emerge of broadleaf evergreens. And then closer to the savanna, trees will get more grouped, more thorny species, and you'll see some mixed grasses and shrubs. In Mediterranean woodland, you will find mid-sized oaks, evergreen or winter deciduous trees, sometimes some other trees like olive trees, pine trees, pistachios, pepper, etc. Understory of mainly grasses, occasional shrub, and some forbs in early spring. And these will mainly be found in your Mediterranean CSA or CSB, where you have gentle slopes, hills with deep, well-draining soils. Some examples on Earth are the hills of California and around the Mediterranean basin. Next we have desert woodland. And this is going to be a discontinuous or grouped smaller trees. There'll be an understory of desert shrubs, maybe some forbs or grasses in really good years. And you'll find this a lot in the transition from a desert to a more montane forest vegetation. And in California, these are going to have trees like the Joshua tree, junipers, with artemisia and creosote bush, occasional forbs like the California poppies, blue lupines, and you'll see these a lot on higher hill slopes overlooking deserts in your regions like Desert Steppe, BWH, BWK. All right, so now we have all of our biomes mapped. And just to bring, we say this every time, but I've done a lot of research here while putting all this together, and while some of it is common knowledge, there are definitely a number of resources that I've relied on very heavily for this guide. I will have those linked below, and also in the blog posts I have like a whole reference section where I list a ton of links and articles that I've read and used in my research. I'm also going to link a number of videos down below that I think are really good for diving even further into these biomes if you want to learn more about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, a subscribe, maybe share it. I would really appreciate it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But otherwise, if you have any questions, any comments, problems, have a request, put it down below. But I think that's it for biomes. So I will see you in the next one.